What is a miracle? There have been many answers given to answer that question, but generally, a miracle is described as an event where God weaves an extraordinary event into the ordinary structure of the physical laws He's created to govern our universe. Now, while I recognize that as a helpful definition, it's pretty simplistic. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about just ordinary things that take place all around us on a day to day basis, our very existence is a miracle. For example, if you were to take two different seeds, take an acorn that has dropped from an oak tree and plant it in the soil, or take the seed of a rose bush, plant it in that same soil, somehow without arms, without legs, without workers that go out and do work for those seeds draw from the soil the materials necessary to self assemble themselves into two totally different structures. On top of that, those seeds also have the ability, when those structures are formed, to self replicate. That is, they produce seeds that can be planted in an innumerable and inestimable number of instances and replicate themselves throughout the world. That's incredible. That is miraculous. Today, we're going to look at a miracle Jesus did in John chapter 6, where he fed up to 20,000 people instantaneously, creating food out of nothing. Join me today as we go deeper in John's Gospel. Yes, indeed, we are creatures made in the likeness of an awesome and powerful God. Few things demonstrate our capacities than our current space program as humanity sets its sights on the stars. Will God allow us to take the curse off of planet Earth and the sphere of the moon? Those are things that are going to be found out in the near future. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the People Scholar Bible Study YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Jay Williams, and I'd like to welcome you back to our study in John's Gospel. Today, we're going to be looking at John chapter 6, specifically verses 1 through 15. If you have your Bibles with you, please turn there now as we go to God's Word together. Now, looking at verse 1, we read, "After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, 'Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?' He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little." One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Now in chapter 6, John tells us that Jesus goes to Galilee. Last time we were together in John chapter 5, Jesus had healed the man at the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem during the Sabbath. That man, walking for the first time in 4 decades, is seen by the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees had created a number of man-made laws, rabbinical laws, that regulated the Sabbath day that were not from God. They were man-made laws One of those laws was that you could not walk on the Sabbath with a mat. So this man, joyful of being healed by Jesus, is walking through the city, and he's spotted by the Pharisees, and they go up to him and confront him as to why he was walking on the Sabbath. Of course, that man pointing them to Jesus, saying that he had healed him. The Pharisees then go to Jesus and get into an argument with Jesus. Well, let me get this straight. Jesus heals a man who has been paralyzed for 4 decades, and somehow the religious leaders turn that against Jesus in front of the people. Wonder how that worked out for them. Jesus, after that argument, leaves Jerusalem, goes northeast to Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is the main body of water in the northeastern section of the country of Israel. That body of water feeds all the way down the Jordan Plain. If you were to go to Israel today, that plain is very lush. There's lots of dates that are grown there and other crops. It's well fed by the water source that comes from Galilee. And it goes all the way down to the southeastern section of the country where the Dead Sea is. That is the lowest elevation on earth, a place where many of us get skin products and, of course, bath salts for our bathtubs. A wonderful place to visit. Anyways, Jesus going to Galilee in the northeastern section, John tells us that that area had also been called the Sea of Tiberias. Why was that? Well, in AD 20, Herod Antipas, who had built many different structures throughout Israel at that time, had the city of Tiberias founded and named it after Tiberius Caesar. That city became a very important trade city and also grew in its significance as a northeastern city of the Roman Empire. Eventually became so prominent that the Sea of Galilee became also known as, to the Romans, the Sea of Tiberias. Indeed, the city of Tiberias exists to this day. In 2015, I had the experience of going to Israel, and during our trip there, we had an opportunity to stay on the northeastern shores of the Sea of Galilee, directly across from the city of Tiberias. This memory of mine is one of my favorite memories in my life, but we were staying at a kibbutz on the opposite side of where the city of Tiberias was, and at nighttime, everybody was out playing and swimming in the Sea of Galilee. I had an opportunity to sneak away from the crowd, and I found an area where there had been some overgrown reeds growing, where I could sort of get into the reeds, and there was a little section of the beach that was hollowed out on the inside of where these reeds were, and I sat down there. I remember looking up at the stars and sort of just looking out at the waters. The waters were very still that night. The stars were bright. And I was just contemplating and thinking about how Jesus himself had sat down with the disciples on those very shores, on that very beach. It's likely they would have had campfires there, cooked fish there. Jesus would have been laughing with the disciples and others who went out to meet him and get to know him. It was one of the most profound experiences in my life. What struck me the most is just thinking that the God that came to earth, the God that became a human being, is the kind of God that would step into our joys and sorrows and walk life with us as a human being so that he understood us from the inside out. If I had to think of a God that I would love and that I would pick to be the God of the universe, that indeed would be it. And yet, this is what we see Jesus doing. We see the heart of God perfectly reflected in the Son as he sat with us and engaged us in a very intimate way that only a human being can do. That is the God of the New Testament. It was a profound experience. It was a wonderful memory, one I'll never forget, that took place on these very shores. Now, as I looked across the sea to the city of Tiberias at night, it was amazing. As you looked at the city, it looked like a torch set on a hillside at nighttime because of the lights that were coming from the city. Not far from there is likely the historical site of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says that a city on a hill lights up all of its surroundings, referring to the church, that you can't hide the light of a believer. It should shine brightly in a dark world. It's likely, as I sat there and looked at where that city was, that Jesus was using the city of Tiberias as an object lesson of what that imagery looks like to the disciples. Now, looking at verses 2-4, Jesus and the disciples go up on a mountainside. Now, when you think of mountains, don't think of the Rocky Mountains. That is, if you're from North America, this is more the mountains of East Tennessee. They are more of a humble mountain, foothills, if you will. Jesus and his disciples go up to this higher elevation. As they look down, there are masses of people coming from all directions that had seen Jesus heal the sick. Likely they're coming from Jerusalem and all around after Jesus healed the man at Bethesda. That man, again, having been paralyzed for 38 years, news would spread very quickly. If you think about in a modern context, if someone had the power to go into a hospital and heal everybody in that hospital, news would spread very quickly and everyone would be coming out to meet Jesus and likely bringing their loved ones who had some sort of illness or disease in the hopes that Jesus would heal that individual out of love and compassion. So the crowds are coming to him. It's during the Passover. So that is rare as well. The people normally would be going to Jerusalem. They're not going to Jerusalem. They are believing that this is indeed the Messiah, that he has more authority than the temple authorities themselves, and they're going out to see what Jesus is doing. And Jesus looks down on them and realizing that they're all hungry, that they had been walking for some time. It is about a 100-mile journey from Jerusalem to Galilee. So if any of those individuals had walked that distance, they were tired, they were hungry, and Jesus has compassion on them. Then Jesus, knowing already what he was going to do, we read in verses 5 through 10. Lifting up his eyes then and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now, as we pause and reflect on these couple of verses, Jesus is having fun with the disciples. He's ribbing them. He's asking them questions. He already knows what he's going to do, but he's doing it to put them in a situation where they're put on the spot and they have to come up with an answer. And it's kind of hilarious. Jesus looks over at Philip. There's 20,000 people present. That's a figure that would have populated the city of Jerusalem to a large extent at that time. And he says, "Philip, how are we going to get food to feed all of these people?" Philip, being from a town close by, the town of Bethsaida, probably ran through his mind, there's no bakeries that can supply this kind of food. We don't have any fisheries that can supply this kind of food that we need. And he looks at Jesus and he says, "I don't know. Even if we had 200 denarii worth of food, we would only be able to give each person a little bit of food." That was about 8 months' wages at this time. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, having some of the same characteristics as Peter, extroverted all the way, looks over at Jesus and says, "Jesus, there's a little boy here who has a few loaves and a few fish, but what is that amongst so many?" Jesus then, about to show them again his power, says to them, "Go have the people sit down." Now, this miracle that was about to take place was extraordinary. This was a miracle that is recorded in all 4 synoptic gospels. That is That is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's the only miracle that shows up in all 4 synoptic gospels. But until this point, Jesus had done a number of miracles. If you think back to John chapter 2, he turns ordinary water into wine at a wedding feast. Then he goes to Jerusalem, meets Nicodemus, and goes from Jerusalem back to Cana. And on the way, he stops in Samaria, where he meets the woman at the well, tells her everything that she had done in her life. Of course, that woman repents of her sin and believes in Jesus. Jesus then goes to the village in Samaria, and many others believe in him through his wisdom. He then goes to Cana again and heals the official's son. After that, he goes back to Jerusalem, heals the man who was paralyzed for 38 years at the pool of Bethesda, and now he comes again to northern Israel, the northeastern section of Israel, to the Sea of Galilee, and 20,000 people come to him who are hungry. Now, there are several key takeaways that have direct application to our daily lives. First of all, Jesus models for us, as the Son of God himself, giving thanks for his food. Right away, we see in verse 11, Jesus lifts the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. Immediately in front of all the people, Jesus, as the Son of God, thanks the Father for his goodness to humanity, and the Father provides through the Son this lavish meal for the people who were hungry. That's a model for us and how we should be with our families. We should give thanks, not because it's the religious thing to do, but because it comes truly from a heart that's saying, "God, thank you for giving me this food. Thank you so much that you've provided for my family, for my needs. And I want to recognize this before we eat that you are the provider of our food. You give us our jobs, you provide our homes for us, our friends. All that we have is a good gift from you because you are truly a good God. Secondly, we have to look at this miracle and see Jesus creates out of nothing. That is, he doesn't take any existing matter and turn it into food. When Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, Satan tempted him, saying, Jesus, turn one of these rocks into a loaf of bread. So he could have done that. He turned water into wine. But Jesus creates out of nothing, which points us back to Genesis chapter 1. When God created the material universe, it came into being merely because Jesus spoke it into being. That is, he has the power to generate material substances. He has that kind of power. He is the creator. So this miracle is very unique in the sense that he creates out of nothing, demonstrating that he is the creator God who can do all things. Furthermore, we see that Jesus allows the people to eat to their fill. In our day and age, there is no shortage of gurus that tell us to eat this or to eat that, or that this is too much or that that is too little. Everything that we experience in our modern times can be quite exacerbating as people tell us what we should and shouldn't do and give us advice, oftentimes erroneous advice, because they're trying to make money off of us. Jesus gives us a very clear indication here that there's nothing wrong with enjoying a feast and eating till you are full. The only caveat, he says, is make sure that nothing is wasted. God is a God who cares about excess so that we live in this life in a way that is responsible. So Jesus sends out the disciples after verse 11 and 12, and they gather the remaining fragments. And then we learn that the people, seeing the miracle that had just taken place in their midst, obviously reminiscent of the Old Testament where God had provided manna from heaven to care for the children of Israel, rush upon Jesus. And there, as the commotion begins to grow and as the vibe begins to expand, Jesus recognizes that they want to make him king. They want to hail him as Messiah. And of course, it not being his time yet, he disappears. But the miracle remains, and those fiery coals in the hearts of the people burn bright as God came close. What a wonderful expression of God's love for us, and a miracle that has not been forgotten these 2 millennia later to tell us of God's love and his power to do miracles. That's where we're going to leave off today, but I'd love for you to join me next time as we go deeper and deeper into John's gospel and the person of Jesus Christ.